The sting of her palm against my cheek echoed through the courthouse steps. My daughter-in-law Heather smirked, her perfect manicured nails pointing at my face. "Filthy old woman! You're the shame of this family!" she screamed while onlookers gasped. My son James stood silent beside her, eyes downcast, betraying me with his silence. She pushed me backward, causing me to stumble. "You'll regret coming here today," she hissed. 5 minutes later, I watched her face turn ghostly pale as I took my seat in the judge's chair. I never imagined my 35 years as a family court judge would collide so violently with my personal life. I had always been careful to keep those worlds separate. The courthouse was my sanctuary where justice and fairness reigned. My home was where I had raised my son James alone after his father David died of cancer when James was only 15. Those early years after David's death were difficult but precious. James and I formed a bond that I thought was unbreakable. We spent weekends fishing at Crescent Lake, just like David used to do with him. I helped him navigate college applications, celebrated when he got into the University of Oregon, and maintained our tradition of Sunday dinners even when he moved to his own apartment across town. He became a successful architect, and I couldn't have been prouder. Then came Heather. They met at a charity gala 3 years ago. James called me the very next day, his voice filled with excitement. "Mom, I met someone amazing last night," he told me. Heather Barnes, the daughter of wealthy real estate developers from Seattle. She was beautiful, with long auburn hair and a smile that lit up her entire face. I was thrilled for him. The first time I met her at our favorite restaurant in downtown Portland, I noticed how she captivated everyone around her with stories of her travels through Europe and her volunteer work with underprivileged children. James looked at her like she hung the moon. But there was something beneath that polished surface that made me uneasy. The way she cut off the server mid-sentence, how she looked around the room constantly, as if searching for someone more important to talk to. The slight eye roll when James mentioned our fishing trips. "Your son is absolutely wonderful, Aurora," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You must be so proud of raising such a successful man all by yourself." Her words were perfect, but there was something cold in her eyes that made my skin prickle. 6 months later, they were engaged. The wedding was a lavish affair at the Grand Falls Hotel, with 400 guests, most of whom I'd never met. Heather's parents spared no expense, though they barely spoke to me during the reception. I hugged James tightly before he left for their honeymoon. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "Thanks for everything." After they returned, things changed quickly. Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. James always had an excuse. Heather was tired. They had plans with her friends. Work was busy. When they did come, Heather dominated the conversation, frequently checking her phone or making subtle criticisms about my home. "This neighborhood has really gone downhill, hasn't it?" she commented once, while looking out my front window at the street where I'd lived for 30 years. "Have you thought about moving somewhere safer, Aurora? We worry about you here all alone." The isolation happened so gradually I barely noticed it happening. James stopped answering my calls immediately, taking days to return them. When we did talk, he sounded distracted, rushed. Old friends of his mentioned they hardly saw him anymore. His college roommate Tom called me once, concerned. "Is James okay? He keeps canceling our plans last minute. Says Heather isn't feeling well." One evening, James came over alone while Heather was at a spa weekend with her friends. Over dinner, he seemed more like his old self. We laughed about old memories, and he asked my advice about a difficult project he was working on. As he was leaving, he hugged me tightly. "Heather says you never liked Dad's parents," he said suddenly, pulling away. "She said you kept him from seeing them before they died." I was stunned. "James, that's not true. Your grandparents lived in Florida. We visited them every summer until they passed away. You were there. You remember those trips." He looked confused for a moment. "Maybe I'm mixing things up," he said. But the seed had been planted. More false stories followed. According to Heather, I had been cruel to David during his illness. I had never accepted her because I was jealous of their relationship. I had borrowed money from James and never paid it back. Each accusation was more hurtful and bizarre than the last. Things came to a head at Thanksgiving last year. I had spent days preparing all of James's favorite dishes. When they arrived, Heather immediately complained about the temperature in my home, the smell of the turkey, the formality of the dining room table. "Where's Grandma's pearl necklace?" she asked suddenly during dessert. "The one you always wear on special occasions." "It's in my jewelry box upstairs," I replied, puzzled. "Why do you ask?" "That's strange," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "Because I saw it in your bedroom earlier when I went to use your bathroom, and now it's gone." "Heather, what are you saying?" James asked, his fork frozen midway to his mouth. "I think your mother took it off and hid it because she doesn't want me to inherit it someday," Heather declared, crossing her arms. It was such an absurd accusation that I actually laughed. "Would you like me to go get it right now?" "Don't bother," Heather snapped. "You've probably already hidden it somewhere else by now." I looked at James, waiting for him to defend me. Instead, he stared at his plate, his jaw tight. "Mom, if you're having money problems, you know you can ask us for help. You don't need to do things like this." I felt like I'd been slapped. "You can't possibly believe I would steal from you." "Just drop it, Mom," he muttered. "Let's just enjoy the holiday." They left an hour later. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and leftover food, feeling more alone than I had since David died. In the months that followed, I tried repeatedly to reconnect with James. I sent texts and emails, called his office, left voicemails. I even drove by their house once, but no one answered the door. I received occasional terse responses. "Very busy with work. We'll call when things settle down. Not a good time right now." Then, one day, I received a text from James's number. "Please stop contacting me. You're making Heather uncomfortable. We need space." I was devastated. I respected his wishes and stopped reaching out, though it broke my heart a little more each day. Weeks passed with no contact at all. Then, by sheer chance, I ran into Tom at the grocery store. "Have you talked to James lately?" he asked. "I've been trying to reach him about the reunion next month. He asked me to stop contacting him." I admitted sadly. "Said they needed space." Tom looked confused. "That's weird. I just saw him last week. He said he's been trying to reach you, but you never respond to his messages." My blood ran cold. That evening, I called James from a different phone number. When he answered, his voice sounded wary. "Hello? James, it's Mom." "Mom?" He sounded genuinely surprised. "Why are you calling from this number?" "I've been trying to reach you for weeks." That's when I knew. Heather had been intercepting my messages and responding as James. She had been methodically cutting us off from each other, rewriting our relationship to suit her narrative. The question was why. The morning I saw Heather's name on my court docket, I thought there must be some mistake. Barnes versus Taylor. Custody hearing for minor child Lily Taylor, age 8. Petitioner: Heather Barnes Wilson. Respondent: Ethan Taylor. I immediately called my judicial assistant, Margaret. "There must be an error. This can't be my daughter-in-law." "Let me check," Margaret replied. After a moment of keyboard clicking, she continued, "Heather Barnes Wilson, married to James Wilson, seeking custody of her niece following the death of Amanda Barnes Taylor 6 months ago. Does that sound right?" I sat back in my chair, stunned. I vaguely remembered James mentioning that Heather's sister had died in a car accident earlier in the year, but he hadn't shared any details. I hadn't even known Amanda had a daughter. My first instinct was to recuse myself. The Code of Judicial Ethics was clear about conflicts of interest. I called Judge Samuel Ford, head of the Ethics Committee. "The question isn't whether you know the petitioner," Sam advised, after hearing the situation. "It's whether you can remain impartial. Can you rule based solely on the evidence presented and the best interests of the child?" I considered his question carefully. My relationship with Heather was strained, certainly, but I had no personal knowledge of her sister, the child, or the respondent. My professional integrity had been the cornerstone of my career. In 35 years on the bench, I had never allowed personal feelings to influence my rulings. Yes, I answered firmly. I can be impartial. Then there's no ethical requirement to recuse yourself, Sam said. But Aurora, document everything. Every interaction. Every decision. If she raises the issue of your relationship, be transparent with both parties, and let them decide if they want to request a different judge. The first day of the hearing, I arrived at court early to review the case files. Amanda Barnes Taylor had died in a single car accident 6 months earlier. Her will had explicitly granted custody of Lily to the child's father, Ethan Taylor. Heather was contesting the will, claiming Ethan was an unfit parent with substance abuse issues that Amanda had been unaware of when drafting her will. At precisely 9 o'clock, I entered the courtroom and took my seat. All rise for the Honorable Judge Aurora Wilson, the bailiff announced. As the gallery stood, I scanned the room and found myself looking directly into Heather's eyes. The shock on her face was immediate and absolute. Her perfectly composed expression shattered as her mouth fell open and her face drained of color. Beside her, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, her attorney, I presumed, leaned over to whisper something. Heather shook her head violently, her eyes never leaving mine. Across the aisle sat a man in his mid-30s with sandy brown hair. Ethan Taylor. His suit was off the rack, his tie slightly crooked. He looked exhausted but determined. His attorney, a woman with gray-streaked hair, whispered something to him while glancing in my direction. "Be seated," I said, keeping my voice steady and professional. "This is case number JFD 250461, Barnes v. Taylor, regarding custody of minor child Lily Taylor." Before I could continue, Heather's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, I must object to these proceedings immediately. The petitioner has just informed me that you are her mother-in-law. This represents a clear conflict of interest. I had anticipated this. Thank you, counsel. I am indeed married to the petitioner's husband's mother. However, I have no personal knowledge of the facts of this case, the minor child, or the respondent. I have consulted with the Judicial Ethics Board and determined there is no automatic disqualification required. That said, if either party wishes to request my recusal, I will consider the motion." Heather was furiously whispering to her attorney, her face now flushed with anger. After a tense conversation, he addressed the court again. "Your Honor, we would like to formally request your recusal based on personal bias against my client." "On what grounds do you allege bias, counselor?" I asked calmly. "Personal family disputes that would prejudice your Honor against Mrs. Wilson's petition." I nodded. "I will take your motion under advisement and refer it to the Judicial Review Board for immediate consideration. In the meantime, we will proceed with today's scheduled testimony. Mr. Taylor is here with witnesses who have traveled considerable distances, and the child's interests are best served by avoiding unnecessary delays." Heather's attorney looked like he wanted to object further, but wisely remained silent. I made a note to contact the review board during the lunch recess. The morning proceeded with testimony from Ethan's neighbors and Lily's teacher. They painted a picture of a devoted single father who had been an active, loving presence in his daughter's life, even before Amanda's death. Lily was thriving in school, participated in soccer and Girl Scouts, and showed no signs of neglect or distress beyond normal grief for her mother. Heather sat rigidly throughout, occasionally passing notes to her attorney. During the lunch recess, I spoke with Judge Elena Martinez from the review board, who expedited consideration of the recusal motion. "The board finds no grounds for mandatory recusal," Elena informed me. "Family relationship alone isn't disqualifying without evidence of actual bias. We're denying the motion, but advising documentation of all proceedings." When court resumed, I announced the board's decision. Heather's face darkened with fury. Her attorney immediately requested a continuance to explore other options, which I reluctantly granted. Court would reconvene in 3 days. As I gathered my papers, I overheard Heather's attorney saying, "We could appeal to a higher court or request a different judge through administrative channels. Just fix this," Heather hissed. "I don't care what it costs." I left through the judge's private exit, But as I approached my car in the reserved parking area, I heard James calling my name. I turned to see him hurrying toward me, his face tight with anger. "Was this your plan all along?" he demanded. "To use your position to hurt Heather?" "James, I had no idea Heather was involved in this case until I saw the docket yesterday," I explained calmly. "I consulted with the ethics committee before proceeding. The Judicial Review Board has determined there's no conflict of interest. There are hundreds of judges in this county," he snapped. "You couldn't let someone else handle this one case? That's not how judicial assignments work. And you know it," I replied. "Cases are randomly assigned to prevent exactly the kind of manipulation you're suggesting I engage in." "Manipulation?" James laughed bitterly. "That's rich, coming from you. Heather told me you would find a way to interfere in our lives." I felt a flash of anger but kept my voice level. "James, I have not spoken to you in months because you asked me not to contact you. How exactly am I interfering in your lives?" He faltered momentarily. "You know what I mean. This is just convenient timing." "I understand you're upset," I said softly. "But I need you to understand something. In that courtroom, I'm not your mother or Heather's mother-in-law. I'm a judge with an obligation to ensure a fair process for all parties and to make decisions based on the best interests of a child who has lost her mother. That's all that matters here. Just stay out of our business," James said, his voice losing some of its edge. "Heather's been through enough with Amanda's death. She doesn't need this too." As he turned to leave, I couldn't help asking, "James, have you actually read any of the case documents? Do you understand what Heather is trying to do?" He hesitated. "She's trying to give her niece a stable home. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing, if that's what's best for Lily. But the court's job is to determine that based on evidence, not personal preference." "Whatever," he muttered. "Just know that if you rule against Heather, you can forget about ever seeing me again." As he walked away, I felt a hollow ache in my chest. The son I had raised would never have issued such an ultimatum. The James I knew understood the importance of integrity and fairness. I wondered what Heather had told him about this case, and why she was so determined to take custody of her niece away from a father who, by all accounts so far, seemed loving and capable. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying James's words in my mind. On my nightstand sat a photo of the two of us at his college graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and love. Where had that James gone? And what would happen to our relationship if I followed the evidence where it led? I was reviewing case notes the next morning when my phone rang. It was Margaret, my judicial assistant, her voice tense. "Judge Wilson, the court administrator, needs to speak with you immediately about the Barnes-Taylor case." 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Administrator Dennis Parker, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses who rarely smiled. Today was no exception. "We've received a formal complaint alleging you made biased comments about the petitioner to a third party," he stated without preamble. "What?" "That's completely false," I replied, stunned. "Who made this allegation?" "The complaint was filed anonymously, but it claims you told someone named Thomas Wright that you were going to make sure that Witch loses her case." Tom Wright, James's college roommate. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks. "Dennis, that conversation never happened. I would never make such comments about any case, let alone one before me." He studied me for a long moment. "I've known you for 20 years, Aurora. I've never had reason to question your integrity. But I need to ask, is there anything about your relationship with Mrs. Wilson that would compromise your ability to rule fairly in this case?" I shook my head firmly. "Nothing whatsoever. I barely know Heather Wilson. Yes, she's married to my son, but our personal interactions have been minimal and have no bearing on the facts of this custody case." "Very well." Dennis nodded. "I'll note your denial in the file. But Aurora, be careful. Someone is trying very hard to get you removed from this case." That evening, I pulled into my driveway after a long day in court. As I gathered my briefcase from the passenger seat, I noticed a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. Thinking it was an advertisement, I almost tossed it without reading. But something made me unfold it. Back off the case, or else. My hands trembled slightly as I read the crude block letters. I glanced around the darkened street, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Inside, I locked the door behind me and called the police. Officer Stanton arrived 20 minutes later. A young man with a serious expression who carefully placed the note in an evidence bag. "Judge Wilson, have you received any other threats recently?" he asked, making notes in his small pad. "No, nothing like this. Any unusual phone calls? People hanging around your home or workplace?" I started to say no, then remembered. I've had several hang-up calls in the past few days. I assumed they were telemarketers. Officer Stanton looked up from his notes. "Judge, given your position, we take threats like this seriously. I'd recommend installing security cameras around your property. And perhaps staying with a friend for a few days? I appreciate your concern, officer, but I'm not going to be driven from my home by an anonymous note." After he left, promising to increase patrols in my neighborhood, I sat in my kitchen staring at nothing. Years on the bench had earned me my share of angry litigants, but this felt different, more personal, more calculated. The next morning, I discovered all 4 tires on my car had been slashed. The following day, another note appeared on my front porch. "Judges should be impartial. Are you?" I installed security cameras that weekend, positioning them to cover all approaches to my house and car. The footage showed nothing unusual for 2 nights. Then at 3:17 in the morning, the front camera captured a figure in dark clothing standing across the street, just watching my house. The image was too grainy and distant to identify the person. When I arrived at court Monday morning, Judge Martha Thompson was waiting by my office. Martha and I had been friends for over 20 years, having come up through the ranks together. Her sharp intelligence and no-nonsense attitude had earned her respect throughout the legal community. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, following me into my office. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then told her everything: James, Heather, the custody case, the threats. Martha listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly concerned. "You need to report this to the sheriff," she said when I finished. "This goes beyond ordinary harassment." "And say what? That I think my daughter-in-law is trying to intimidate me?" "Without proof, it sounds paranoid." "Then get proof," Martha advised. "Have the police review your security footage. And Aurora, take a closer look at this custody case. There's clearly something about it that Heather doesn't want you to discover." That night, I pored over the case files again. On paper, Heather's petition seemed straightforward. She claimed Ethan Taylor had hidden a history of substance abuse from her sister Amanda. According to Heather, Ethan had been in rehab twice before meeting Amanda and had relapsed several times during their marriage. She alleged that Amanda had been planning to leave him when she died, but something didn't add up. If Amanda had truly believed Ethan was an unfit father, why would she explicitly name him as Lily's guardian in her will? And why was Heather so determined to gain custody that she would resort to intimidation? The security footage from that night revealed the same dark figure, this time clearly taking photos of my house with a long-lens camera. I forwarded the video to Officer Stanton, who called me the next morning. "Judge Wilson, we may have something. The same individual has been observed conducting surveillance at the homes of 2 other judges in the past month. Both judges were presiding over high-profile custody cases. Have you identified this person?" "Not yet. But we've increased patrols in your neighborhood and assigned a detective to investigate the connection between these cases." 2 days later, the detective called with an update. "The individual in your security footage has been identified as Gerald Mercer, a private investigator licensed in Washington state. We brought him in for questioning, but he refused to name his client. Claims confidentiality. Can you compel him to reveal who hired him? Not without evidence of a crime more serious than trespassing, but his firm primarily works for 3 law offices, including Brennan and Associates. Daniel Brennan, Heather's attorney." That afternoon, as court recessed for lunch, my bailiff slipped me a note. Someone named Karen Wilson insists on speaking with you. Says it's urgent regarding the Barnes-Taylor case. Waiting in your chambers. I found a nervous-looking woman in her early 40s pacing my office. She froze when I entered. "Are you Judge Wilson?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "Yes. And you are?" "Karen Wilson. No relation to you or your son," she added quickly. "I was Amanda Barnes-Taylor's best friend. I've been taking care of Lily on weekends to help Ethan. Miss Wilson, I can't discuss this case with you outside of court. I know. I shouldn't be here. But I couldn't figure out another way to." She wrung her hands. Amanda would be horrified by what Heather is trying to do. She never wanted Heather anywhere near Lily. I kept my expression neutral. "Miss Wilson, if you have relevant testimony, you should speak with Mr. Taylor's attorney." I tried. But Heather found out somehow and threatened to sue me for defamation if I got involved. Karen's eyes filled with tears. "Judge Wilson, I promised Amanda I would look out for Lily if anything happened to her. I have to honor that promise." "What exactly are you saying?" "Amanda knew she had a dangerous heart condition. She updated her will just 3 months before she died. She specifically told me, if anything happens to me and Ethan, Karen, promise me Lily will never go to my sister. Heather only cares about herself." As much as I wanted to hear more, I couldn't ethically continue this conversation. "Miss Wilson, I appreciate your concern for Lily, but I need you to share this information through proper legal channels. Contact Mr. Taylor's attorney immediately. If you're worried about retaliation, the court can issue protective orders." After Karen left, I sat at my desk troubled by what she had revealed. If Amanda had deliberately excluded Heather from guardianship, what was driving Heather's determination to gain custody of Lily? What wasn't I seeing? That evening, as I reviewed security footage, I noticed something new. The same car had driven past my house 3 times in the past hour. As I watched, it parked down the street, and the driver, a woman with auburn hair, stepped out and appeared to take photos of my home with her phone. My heart pounded as I zoomed in on the grainy image. It wasn't a professional investigator this time. It was Heather. The next morning, I received an unexpected visitor in my chambers. Sheriff Detective Lisa Jordan, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years of experience in the department's Special Investigations Unit, had reviewed the footage from my security cameras. "Judge Wilson, the woman photographing your home last night has been identified as Heather Wilson," Detective Jordan confirmed. "This changes the nature of our investigation from possible judicial harassment to a direct conflict of interest involving a party to active litigation before you." My stomach tightened. "Detective, to be clear, I had no prior knowledge that Mrs. Wilson was personally involved in this surveillance." "I understand, Your Honor. We're pursuing this as a separate investigation from your custody case. But you should know we've uncovered some interesting connections." She opened a folder on my desk. "Gerald Mercer, the PI who's been watching your house, works almost exclusively for the law firm representing Mrs. Wilson. And in the past 2 years, he's conducted surveillance on 3 other judges, presiding over cases involving the Barnes family or their business interests. Are you saying this is a pattern?" "It appears so. We've also learned that Mrs. Wilson has filed complaints against 4 other judges in various jurisdictions. Each time, the case eventually got reassigned." Detective Jordan hesitated. "Judge, there's something else you should know. We executed a search warrant on Mercer's office based on evidence of illegal recording devices. We found notes specifically about you, personal information, daily routines, details about your son." I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would Heather need that kind of information about me? That's what we're trying to determine. In my experience, this level of surveillance usually indicates someone looking for leverage or pressure points. After Detective Jordan left, I sat at my desk thinking about Karen Wilson's visit and her claim that Amanda had specifically wanted to keep Lily away from Heather. What was I missing? I called Martha Thompson and asked her to lunch. At a small cafe several blocks from the courthouse, I shared everything I'd learned. "Aurora, have you looked into why Heather is so determined to get custody of this child?" Martha asked, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. The petition cites family connection and providing a stable two-parent home, I replied. Standard arguments in a case like this. There's nothing standard about hiring private investigators to intimidate a judge, Martha pointed out. What's Lily's financial situation? Any inheritance or trust fund? I paused, realizing I hadn't considered this angle. I don't know. The case file doesn't mention any substantial assets. Maybe it's time you found out. Custody cases rarely attract this kind of aggressive behavior, unless there's something valuable at stake. That afternoon, I discreetly requested the probate records related to Amanda Taylor's estate. What I found was illuminating. Amanda Barnes Taylor had established a trust fund for Lily, valued at nearly $2 million, to be managed by her legal guardian until Lily turned 25. The guardian would have considerable discretion over how the funds were used for Lily's care, education, and welfare in the meantime. $2 million. That changed everything. I dug deeper, researching Heather and James's financial situation as thoroughly as possible without crossing ethical boundaries. Public records showed they had purchased their home 2 years ago for $1.4 million, with a mortgage that would require substantial monthly payments. James's architectural firm was successful, but modest in size. Heather was listed as the marketing director for her family's real estate development company, Barnes Enterprises. A search of recent business news revealed something interesting. Barnes Enterprises had been named in several lawsuits alleging fraudulent practices and was reportedly facing significant financial difficulties. Their most recent development project had stalled midway through construction. I was so absorbed in my research that I almost missed the knock at my door. Margaret poked her head in. "Judge Wilson? There's someone here to see you. Says he has information about the Barnes-Taylor case that you need to see immediately." The visitor was a well-dressed man in his 50s who introduced himself as Edward Michaels, former financial controller for Barnes Enterprises. "I resigned 6 months ago after discovering irregularities in the company accounts," he explained, placing a folder on my desk. "I brought these documents because I believe they're relevant to Heather Barnes Wilson's petition for custody of Lily Taylor. Mr. Michaels, I cannot ethically review evidence outside of court proceedings," I began. "I understand, Your Honor. I've already provided these to Mr. Taylor's attorney. I merely wanted to ensure you were aware they exist." He stood to leave. "These records show that Heather Barnes Wilson has been systematically embezzling from her family's company for the past 3 years. The company is on the verge of bankruptcy, and Mrs. Wilson is personally in debt for over $800,000. After he left, I immediately recused myself from any further contact with the documents and called both attorneys to inform them of the visit. Mr. Taylor's attorney confirmed they had received the financial records and would be presenting them as evidence at the next hearing. That evening, as I drove home, my mind was racing. If Heather was truly in desperate financial straits, gaining control of Lily's trust fund would solve her problems. The pieces were starting to fit together, but I needed more information about Heather's background. The following day, I received a call from a court clerk in Seattle. "Judge Wilson, you requested information about prior cases involving Heather Barnes?" I found something interesting. 6 years ago, she was engaged to a man named Gregory Patterson. When they broke up, she filed a lawsuit claiming partial ownership of his software company based on alleged verbal promises. The case was eventually dismissed, but the judge noted concerns about the credibility of Miss Barnes's testimony. This new information sent me down another research path. With Martha's help, I discreetly contacted Judge William Foster, who had presided over the Patterson case. I remember it clearly, Judge Foster told me over the phone. Miss Barnes was extremely vindictive after the breakup. She made numerous accusations against Patterson, none of which could be substantiated. When she lost the case, she filed ethics complaints against me and attempted to have my ruling overturned based on alleged bias. "Did she use private investigators to gather information about you?" I asked. "How did you know?" "Yes, my home was photographed, and personal information about my family was somehow obtained. Nothing came of it, but it was unsettling." I hung up feeling increasingly concerned about Heather's pattern of behavior. That same day, I received a call from Karen Wilson. Judge Wilson, I've formally submitted my statement to Mr. Taylor's attorney, but there's something else you should know. I found letters that Amanda wrote to Lily, to be given to her when she's older. In them, she explains why she and Heather were estranged. Apparently, Heather had stolen money from their parents and blamed Amanda. When Amanda confronted her, Heather threatened to ruin her reputation. They barely spoke for years after that. Miss Wilson, why are you telling me this outside of court? Because I'm afraid. Yesterday, someone broke into my house while I was at work. Nothing valuable was taken, but Amanda's letters are missing. I'm certain it was Heather. I advised Karen to report the break-in to the police immediately and to inform Mr. Taylor's attorney about the missing letters. That evening, I received an unexpected visit from my colleague Judge Richard Green, who handled probate cases. Aurora, I came across something today that might interest you. I'm overseeing the administration of Amanda Taylor's estate, including the trust fund for her daughter. Richard, I'm presiding over a related custody case. I need to be careful about ex parte communications. I understand. I'm not here to discuss the custody issue. But you should know that someone attempted to access Lily's trust fund last month by presenting fraudulent documents claiming to be her temporary guardian. The bank flagged it and reported it to my court. Who made this attempt? Heather Wilson. When confronted, she claimed it was a misunderstanding about her authority as the child's aunt. My clerk is preparing a report for the prosecutor's office to review for possible charges. After Richard left, I sat in my living room wrestling with my conscience. The evidence against Heather was mounting, pointing to a calculated effort to gain control of Lily's trust fund. But as a judge, I couldn't allow this information to bias my ruling on the custody petition. The only relevant question was whether Ethan Taylor was a fit parent for Lily. Yet I also couldn't ignore the increasingly clear pattern of deception and manipulation that characterized Heather's behavior, both in court and in her personal life, including her relationship with my son. I was still deep in thought when my doorbell rang. To my shock, James was standing on my porch, looking troubled and uncertain. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think we need to talk." I stepped aside to let James enter, noticing how tired he looked. The confident, vibrant young man I knew had been replaced by someone wound tight with tension, dark circles under his eyes. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual despite the emotional storm brewing inside me. "Please," he nodded, following me to the kitchen. He glanced around, his eyes lingering on the familiar surroundings of his childhood home. "The place looks the same. Some things don't change," I replied, busying myself with the coffee maker. James sat at the kitchen table, running his fingers through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "I shouldn't have said what I did the other day. About never seeing you again if you ruled against Heather. That wasn't me." I placed a mug of coffee in front of him and sat down. "No, it wasn't. The James I raised understands that justice isn't a bargaining chip." He stared into his coffee. "I don't know what's happening, Mom. The past couple of years, it's like I've been in a fog." "Tell me," I urged gently. James took a deep breath. "When I first met Heather, she was amazing. Fun, supportive, passionate about everything. But after we got married, things changed. Small things at first. She would check my phone when I wasn't looking. Question where I'd been if I was 10 minutes late from work. Tell me friends or colleagues had said things about me that I later found out weren't true." I listened silently, letting him find his way through the story. "She told me you never approved of her, that you'd said horrible things about her to family, friends. When I defended you, she would cry and ask why I didn't believe her. Eventually, it was easier to just agree, to keep the peace." He looked up, shame in his eyes. "I know how weak that sounds. It's not weakness, James. It's a very human response to constant emotional pressure. A few months ago, I noticed money missing from our joint accounts. Large amounts. When I asked Heather about it, she exploded, accused me of not trusting her, then claimed it was for surprise renovations to my home office. But the renovations never happened. He paused. Then last month, I discovered credit cards in my name that I never applied for. Maxed out. Nearly $50,000 in debt. I felt a surge of anger on his behalf, but kept my expression neutral. Have you spoken to a financial advisor? Or an attorney? Not yet. I've been gathering documentation, trying to understand the full scope of it. James hesitated. Then this custody case started, and Heather became obsessed. She talks about Lily's trust fund constantly, about all the things we'll be able to do once she fixes our financial situation. When I asked what that meant, she said her parents are giving us money. James, I said carefully, I can't discuss the details of the case with you. But I think you should know that Detective Jordan from the Sheriff's Department came to see me today. Heather has been conducting surveillance on me, taking photographs of my home. His face paled. What? No, that can't be right. There's video evidence. And she hired a private investigator who's been watching my house for weeks. James shook his head in disbelief. This is insane. Why would she do that? I think you know why, I said gently. She doesn't want me presiding over this case because she's afraid I'll discover her true motivations. James stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to me. This morning, she told me she's pregnant, that we're going to have a baby. I felt a jolt of surprise. That's unexpected timing. Yeah. His voice was flat. Especially since we've been sleeping in separate bedrooms for the past 3 months. I joined him at the window, placing my hand on his shoulder. James, what do you need from me right now? He turned, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. I don't know. Clarity, I guess. I feel like I've been living in some alternate reality where nothing makes sense anymore. Then let's start by establishing some facts, I suggested. What do you know for certain about Heather's relationship with her sister? With Lily? Not much, James admitted. They weren't close. Amanda never visited our home. I met her maybe twice at larger family gatherings. Heather always said Amanda was jealous of her success. He frowned. But after Amanda died, Heather suddenly started talking about how close they were, how she had promised to take care of Lily if anything happened. And Lily? What's your relationship with her? I've only met her a few times. Sweet kid. Quiet. She calls me Uncle James, but I can tell she's not comfortable around us. Heather can be harsh with her, critical of her clothes, her manners. Not abusive, just cold. He looked troubled. Mom, if Heather gets custody, Lily would live with us, but our home isn't. It's not a happy place right now. I chose my next words carefully. James, as a judge, I have to make decisions based on the best interests of the child. As your mother, I'm concerned about what's happening in your marriage. These two things are separate issues, but they're both important. He nodded slowly. I know. I need time to figure things out, to understand how things got so messed up. As he turned to leave an hour later, I hugged him tightly. James, whatever happens, remember that I love you. That never changed, even when we weren't speaking. I love you too, Mom, he whispered. I'm sorry I let things get so bad between us. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, thinking about everything he had shared. I was deeply worried about him, trapped in what appeared to be a manipulative and potentially abusive relationship. But I was also concerned about Lily, who might soon be placed in the middle of this volatile situation if Heather's petition was granted. The next morning, I received a text message from James. Need to talk. Important. Can I come by tonight? I replied immediately. Of course. Dinner at 6? When James arrived, he looked even more agitated than the day before. I found something, he said without preamble, placing a phone on my kitchen counter. Heather's secondary phone. The one she thinks I don't know about. James, I can't. I know. You can't look at evidence outside of court. I'm not showing you this as a judge. I'm showing you this as my mother, because I need help understanding what's happening in my life. He ran his hands through his hair. There are texts between Heather and someone named Gerald discussing their surveillance project. Photos of your house. And Mom. She's not pregnant. There are messages to her friend about faking a pregnancy test to keep James in line. I felt sick. James, I'm so sorry. Don't be. I needed to know the truth. His voice hardened. There's more. Messages about Lily's trust fund. Details about how she plans to use the money once she gets custody. Mom, she's never cared about Lily. This is all about the money. What are you going to do now? I asked quietly. I don't know yet. But I'm done being manipulated. Done letting her isolate me from the people I love. He took a deep breath. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to make sure Lily stays with her father, where she belongs. The determination in his voice reminded me of the strong, principled man I had raised. Despite everything, I felt a surge of pride. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, I promised. But James, be careful. Based on what we've seen so far, Heather won't take this quietly. I know, he nodded grimly. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm just angry. At her and at myself for being so blind for so long. As he left, I couldn't help worrying about what would happen next. The final hearing in the custody case was scheduled for tomorrow. Heather would be fighting for her last chance to get control of Lily's trust fund. And based on her past behavior, she would be willing to do almost anything to win. The courtroom was packed for the final day of the Barnes-Taylor custody hearing. Journalists from local papers filled the back row, drawn by rumors of financial irregularities and surveillance of a judge. Heather sat at the petitioner's table looking immaculate in a conservative navy suit, her auburn hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. Beside her, attorney Daniel Brennan whispered in her ear. Across the aisle, Ethan Taylor appeared calm but tired, occasionally glancing toward a small, dark-haired girl seated with a court-appointed guardian ad litem in the front row. Lily Taylor, 8 years old, dressed in a simple floral dress, her feet swinging above the floor. She looked remarkably like her late mother. I entered promptly at 9 and called the court to order. Good morning. This is the final day of testimony in the matter of Barnes versus Taylor. Before we begin, I want to address some procedural matters. I outlined the allegations of improper surveillance and intimidation that had been referred to the Sheriff's Department for investigation. These matters are being handled separately from the custody determination. However, in the interest of full transparency, all parties should be aware that these allegations exist and are under active investigation. Heather's face remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table. We'll proceed with the remaining witnesses, after which I will render my decision, I concluded. Mr. Brennan, you may call your next witness. Brennan stood. The petitioner calls Nancy Peters. A slight woman with short gray hair approached the witness stand. After being sworn in, she adjusted her glasses nervously. Miss Peters, what is your relationship to Heather Wilson? Brennan asked. I was her personal assistant for approximately 14 months, ending about 6 weeks ago. And why did your employment end? Nancy hesitated. I resigned because I was uncomfortable with certain tasks I was being asked to perform. Brennan frowned. Could you be more specific? Mrs. Wilson asked me to create false financial documents showing Mr. Taylor had gambling debts. When I refused, she became very angry and threatened to ruin my reputation in the business community. Heather half rose from her chair, her face flushed. She's lying. I never— Mrs. Wilson, please. I interrupted firmly. You'll have an opportunity to address these claims through your counsel. Brennan quickly redirected. Miss Peters, isn't it true that you were terminated for poor performance? No, sir. I resigned and have documentation of my resignation letter. No further questions, Brennan said tightly, returning to his seat. Ethan's attorney, Sarah Jenkins, approached the witness. Miss Peters, during your employment with Mrs. Wilson, did she ever discuss her niece Lily or the trust fund established for her? Objection, Brennan called out. Irrelevant to the custody determination. Your Honor, Jenkins countered. The petitioner's motives for seeking custody are directly relevant to determining whether her petition serves the best interests of the child. I'll allow it, I ruled. The witness may answer. Nancy nodded. Yes, Mrs. Wilson discussed Lily's trust fund frequently. She referred to it as her financial solution and had me research ways to access trust funds as a guardian. She was particularly interested in provisions for education and housing expenses. Did Mrs. Wilson ever discuss her relationship with her niece? She rarely mentioned Lily except in relation to the trust. Once, when Lily visited their home, Mrs. Wilson complained afterward that the child was a boring little mouse and nothing like Amanda. Heather was visibly fuming now, whispering furiously to Brennan, who tried to calm her. "Miss Peters, did you ever witness interactions between Mrs. Wilson and Lily?" Jenkins continued. "Yes, twice. Once at a family gathering last Thanksgiving, and once when Lily stayed overnight at their home after Amanda's funeral. Both times, Mrs. Wilson was cold toward Lily, criticizing her table manners and clothing. When Lily spilled juice on the sofa, Mrs. Wilson called her stupid and made her sit alone in the kitchen for the rest of the evening." Jenkins nodded. "Thank you, Miss Peters. No further questions." Brennan declined to cross-examine, likely fearing what else might emerge. The next witness was Lily's teacher, who testified about the child's academic progress and emotional adjustment following her mother's death. "Lily has shown remarkable resilience," the teacher explained. "Her father has been extremely involved, attending all parent-teacher conferences, helping with homework, participating in school activities. Lily feels secure with him." After the teacher, Jenkins called Karen Wilson to testify about Amanda's wishes regarding Lily's guardianship. "Amanda and I discussed her will extensively after her heart condition was diagnosed," Karen explained. "She was very clear that if anything happened to both her and Ethan, I was her first choice as Lily's guardian. She specifically said her sister Heather should never have custody of Lily." "Did she explain why?" Jenkins asked. "She said Heather had always been manipulative and selfish, interested only in status and money. Amanda believed Heather would use Lily's trust fund for her own benefit and wouldn't provide the loving home Lily needed." Brennan objected repeatedly during this testimony, but I allowed most of it as relevant to understanding the family dynamics. As the day progressed, financial experts testified about the structure of Lily's trust fund and irregularities in Heather's attempts to access it. A forensic accountant detailed Heather's personal financial difficulties, including massive credit card debt and evidence of embezzlement from her family's company. Throughout it all, Heather maintained a facade of indignation, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue when testimony turned particularly damaging. But I noticed her eyes remained dry, and her expressions seemed calculated for maximum sympathy. Finally, it was time for Heather herself to testify. As she took the stand, she projected an image of a grieving sister determined to honor her sibling's memory by caring for her niece. "My sister Amanda and I were very close," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "We had our differences, as sisters do, but we always loved each other deeply. When she died, I promised myself I would make sure Lily grew up in a loving, stable home with all the advantages Amanda would have wanted for her." Brennan led her through carefully prepared testimony about her relationship with Lily, her concerns about Ethan's parenting, and her plans for Lily's future. She denied all allegations of financial impropriety and attributed Nancy Peters' testimony to bitter feelings after being terminated for incompetence. When Jenkins began cross-examination, Heather's demeanor subtly shifted. Her answers became more clipped, her eyes harder. "Mrs. Wilson, bank records show you attempted to access Lily's trust fund last month. Can you explain why?" Jenkins asked. "That was a misunderstanding. I was simply inquiring about the process for when I became Lily's guardian. Yet you presented documents claiming temporary guardianship, which you did not have. Isn't that correct?" Heather shifted uncomfortably. There was confusion about my authority as her aunt. Jenkins pressed on. "Mrs. Wilson, your financial records show over $800,000 in personal debt. Is that accurate?" "Objection," Brennan interjected. "Mrs. Wilson's personal finances are not relevant to her ability to provide for her niece. They are relevant if they suggest a financial motive for seeking custody," I ruled. "The witness will answer." Heather's smile tightened. "My husband and I have some temporary financial challenges due to business investments. It has nothing to do with my desire to care for Lily. Mrs. Wilson, did you hire Gerald Mercer to conduct surveillance on Judge Wilson? Absolutely not, Heather exclaimed, looking appropriately shocked. Jenkins approached with a document. I have here phone records showing multiple calls between your cell phone and Mr. Mercer's during the exact time frame when surveillance was conducted. How do you explain that? Heather's composure began to crack. Those must be mistaken. I've never spoken to any Gerald Mercer. And these photographs of Judge Wilson's home found on your secondary phone? The one you keep in your desk drawer? Heather's eyes darted around the courtroom, landing briefly on James, who was watching from the back row. Those aren't mine. Jenkins continued relentlessly, presenting evidence of Heather's manipulation of James, her fabrication of evidence against Ethan, and her attempts to intimidate witnesses. With each question, Heather's carefully constructed facade crumbled further. Finally, Jenkins asked, Mrs. Wilson, isn't it true that your primary interest in Lily is gaining control of her $2 million trust fund to solve your own financial problems? No, Heather snapped, her voice rising. This is all a conspiracy against me. Everyone's trying to make me look bad because they're jealous. Jealous of what exactly? Jenkins asked calmly. Something in Heather seemed to snap. She stood up in the witness box, pointing accusingly around the courtroom. All of you. Pretending to care about some boring little girl when this is really about the money. Ethan doesn't deserve that trust fund. I'm the one who needs it. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Brennan's face went pale. Mrs. Wilson, I said firmly, please control yourself and sit down. But Heather was beyond restraint now, years of careful manipulation giving way to raw fury. You, she snarled, pointing at me. You think you're so much better than everyone else with your precious ethics? James was right to cut you out of our lives. Mrs. Wilson, I began. That trust fund should be mine, she shouted. Amanda always had everything handed to her. The perfect daughter, the perfect mother. She didn't deserve any of it. Brennan was on his feet now, trying desperately to control his client. Your Honor, may we have a brief recess? But Heather wasn't finished. You all think I'm lying? Fine. I did hire that investigator. I did try to access Lily's trust. And yes, I made up evidence against Ethan because he doesn't deserve to raise Amanda's child. That money could fix everything if you'd all just get out of my way. The courtroom had fallen into shocked silence. In the front row, Lily pressed herself against her guardian ad litem, eyes wide with fear. Bailiff, I ordered quietly, please escort Mrs. Wilson to the witness room to compose herself. Court will recess for 15 minutes. As Heather was led away, still shouting accusations, I caught James's eye across the courtroom. The pain in his expression was unmistakable, but there was something else there too. Resolution, and perhaps relief that the truth was finally exposed. When court reconvened, Brennan apologized for his client's outburst and requested time to confer with her. I granted a 30-minute recess, during which Brennan emerged looking grim to announce that they would be withdrawing their petition for custody. In light of today's testimony and other factors, my client recognizes that pursuing this matter further is not in anyone's best interest, he stated formally. Despite the withdrawal, I still needed to issue a formal ruling to close the case. After reviewing my notes and considering all testimony, I delivered my decision. Having carefully considered all evidence presented, I find no grounds to remove Lily Taylor from her father's custody. All testimony and documentation supports that Ethan Taylor is a loving, capable parent providing a stable and nurturing home for his daughter. The petition for custody transfer is denied. I turned to address Ethan directly. Mr. Taylor, the court recognizes the challenges you've faced as a single parent following the tragic loss of your wife. Your dedication to Lily's well-being is evident, and the court has full confidence in your ability to raise her in accordance with her mother's wishes. Finally, I addressed the more troubling aspects of the case. Regarding evidence of potential criminal activity, including attempted financial fraud, intimidation of a judge, and fabrication of evidence, the court is referring these matters to the district attorney's office for review. This case is closed. As the gallery began to disperse, I noticed Lily hugging her father tightly, her small face buried in his shoulder. Ethan's eyes met mine briefly over Lily's head, filled with gratitude and relief. In that moment, despite all the personal pain this case had caused, I knew I had made the right decision. The weeks following the custody hearing brought significant changes to all our lives. 2 days after the final ruling, the district attorney's office filed charges against Heather for attempted fraud, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. She accepted a plea deal that included financial restitution, community service, and mandatory counseling. James filed for divorce immediately, discovering in the process that Heather had opened multiple credit accounts in his name and drained their joint savings. The divorce proceedings were contentious but swift, with James receiving a temporary restraining order after Heather made threatening calls to his office. One crisp October morning, I was enjoying coffee on my porch when a car pulled into my driveway. James stepped out, looking more like himself than he had in years. The haunted expression was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cautious optimism. "Mom," he called, walking up the path. "Got time for a visitor?" I welcomed him with open arms, feeling tears prick my eyes as I held my son close. Always. We settled in the kitchen, falling easily into old patterns. James helped me prepare a fresh pot of coffee, moving around the familiar space as if no time had passed. "The divorce is final," he said, sitting across from me at the table. The judge was understanding about the financial issues once he saw the evidence. "I'll be paying off those credit cards for years, but at least I'm free." "How are you doing, really?" I asked, studying his face. James considered the question carefully. "Better. Some days are harder than others. I still catch myself wondering how I didn't see what was happening, how I let myself believe all those lies about you, about everyone who cared about me. Manipulation happens gradually," I reminded him gently, "especially when it comes from someone you love and trust." "I know. My therapist says the same thing." He smiled wryly. "Still working on forgiving myself, though." We talked for hours, carefully rebuilding the connection that had been severed. James shared his plans to relocate his architectural practice back to Portland, to be closer to family and old friends who had reached out after learning of his situation. "I've leased an office downtown," he explained. "Small, but it's a fresh start. And I found an apartment not far from here." As evening approached, James hesitated before asking, "Have you heard anything about Lily?" I nodded. "Ethan brings her to the courthouse occasionally when he has business there. She's doing well in school, playing soccer. She looks happy." James looked relieved. "Good. I've worried about her. It's not her fault her aunt is." He trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe Heather. "Children are resilient," I assured him. "With love and stability, they can overcome tremendous challenges." The following weekend, James helped me plant tulip bulbs in my garden, something we had done together when he was young. As we worked side by side in the cool autumn air, I felt a deep sense of gratitude that we had found our way back to each other. "Mom," James said, pressing a bulb into the dark soil, "would you be willing to have dinner with Ethan and Lily sometime?" He reached out to me, said he'd like Lily to know the people who helped keep her with her dad. I was surprised but touched by the gesture. I'd like that very much. 2 weeks later, we met Ethan and Lily at a family restaurant known for its pizza and ice cream sundaes. Lily was shy at first, partially hiding behind her father, but she gradually warmed up when James asked about her soccer team. "I play defense," she declared proudly. "Dad comes to all my games. Your mom would be very proud of you," I told her gently. Lily's eyes brightened. "Dad says she watches my games from heaven." "I'm sure she does," I agreed. After dinner, Lily presented me with a crayon drawing she had made. "This is you," she explained, pointing to a figure in black robes. "Dad says you're the strongest judge in the world." I blinked back tears as I accepted her gift. "Thank you, Lily. That's the nicest compliment I've ever received." As Christmas approached, James suggested we invite Ethan and Lily to join us for the holiday. "They don't have much family," he explained. "It might be nice to have a full house again." On Christmas Eve, Our home was filled with warmth and laughter. Lily helped me bake cookies using my mother's old recipe. James and Ethan discovered a shared interest in woodworking and spent hours discussing potential projects. We ate dinner by candlelight, sharing stories and creating new traditions. Later, as James and I washed dishes together, he said quietly, "I never thought I could feel this peaceful again. After everything with Heather, I was afraid I'd lost the ability to trust, to feel part of a family." "Healing takes time," I replied. "But it happens, day by day, moment by moment." The following spring, I received an invitation to Lily's school play. Seated in the audience between James and Ethan, watching Lily deliver her lines with confident enthusiasm, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this unexpected moment of connection. A year after the custody hearing, I announced my retirement from the bench. 36 years was enough. I was ready for a new chapter, one that included more time with James, occasional babysitting for Lily while Ethan had evening meetings, and perhaps some traveling I had postponed for too long. At my retirement ceremony, I was surprised to see Ethan and Lily in the audience, alongside James and colleagues I had worked with for decades. Judge Martha Thompson gave a speech highlighting cases from throughout my career, ending with a reflection on integrity and justice. Judge Aurora Wilson has demonstrated throughout her career that true justice requires not only knowledge of the law, but courage to uphold it even when personally difficult, Martha concluded. Her legacy will continue in the lives she has touched and the examples she has set. Afterward, at a small gathering in my chambers, Lily presented me with a handmade card. "Thank you for being brave," she had written in careful cursive. Later that evening, James and I sat on my back porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "I've been thinking about what courage really means," James said thoughtfully. "It's not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite being afraid." "That sounds about right," I agreed. When I think about how close Lily came to being taken from her father, how Heather almost succeeded in using her for financial gain. He shook his head. One person standing firm made all the difference. "Not just one person," I corrected him. Karen Wilson spoke up despite Heather's threats. Nancy Peters resigned rather than falsify documents. "You found the strength to recognize the truth and act on it." Courage is contagious, James. When one person stands up, it becomes easier for others to do the same. As the stars appeared overhead, I thought about the unexpected family we had formed. James, Ethan, Lily, and me, connected not by blood or obligation, but by choice and shared experience. Life's most difficult challenges had led us to each other, proving that even painful journeys can lead to beautiful destinations. The path of integrity is rarely easy. Standing firm for what's right often comes at a personal cost. But I had learned that the alternative, compromising your principles, ignoring your conscience, exacts a far greater toll in the end. True peace comes not from avoiding difficult choices, but from knowing you made the right one, even when it hurt. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" James asked, noting my silence. "Just that life rarely turns out the way we expect," I replied. "Sometimes it turns out better." The following weekend found us at the baseball stadium, cheering for the home team on a perfect summer day. Lily wore a team cap too large for her head, periodically pushing it back when it slipped over her eyes. James and Ethan discussed the pitcher's technique with the seriousness of sports commentators. I sat among them, soaking in the simple joy of being together. In that moment, surrounded by the family life had given me rather than the one I had planned, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The pain and betrayal that had marked recent years had transformed into something unexpected and precious, a second chance at connection, at trust, at love. Sometimes justice wears a judge's robes. And sometimes it simply looks like a little girl with her father, safe and loved, exactly where she belongs. Have you ever had to stand firm for what's right, even when it cost you personally? What gave you the strength to hold your ground? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that integrity matters. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to follow your conscience, even when the path isn't easy.